Hey, this is Catherine and Katie, and we are here to give you the 401k. Cheers!
Today we're chatting with Meredith Goldstein. Meredith is an advice columnist and entertainment reporter for the Boston Globe and author of Can't Help Myself, Lessons and Confessions from a Modern Advice Columnist. Her love advice column, Love Letters, appears daily on Boston.com and in the Globe's print edition. For the past 9 years, people write in asking about love, sex, marriage, divorce, snooping on partners, breakups, navigating Tinder, and more. She's heard it all, and on top of that, she's a woman who has her own experience with navigating emotions and relationships. Meredith joined us to dish the dirt on some of her most commonly asked questions when it comes to couples combining their finances. Here's what she had to say.
So I had a more general question for you. I found this survey by Wakefield Research for Citigroup that found that more than 3 out of 4 Americans in a committed relationship, which equates to approximately 78%, prefer a partner who's good with money over one who is physically attractive. And I was curious whether this might ever have been seen or consistent with any of the themes that come up in some of your questions that come through to you in your column.
I mean, that's fascinating because I also wonder when they're asked. Like 10 years in a relationship when you're like, oh, this person cannot spend appropriately. Suddenly you shift your priorities around. If you would ask me at 22 if I cared about that kind of thing, I would have probably said I don't care because I myself was not great with my money, right? Mm-hmm. So that's fascinating that people say that. I mean, I do think that we focus so much on a certain kind of betrayal in relationships, like cheating, physical cheating, that we forget that there are so many other ways to betray, and money is a huge
financial infidelity is definitely
it's
something that we definitely want to bring up today.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It could be something as simple as, didn't tell you that I bought this purse because I'm embarrassed. Or it could be something like, oh, I have a separate account that I'm doing all of these other things
Yes,
about.
just in case you
Here's all this money. Exactly. Right. I'm putting money aside for.
Yeah.
Or I have $40,000 in student loans. And you don't know that yet.
Right.
Or surprise, my credit score is 0 because of all XYZ things.
Credit scores are kind of like SATs though, because I think like the lowest you can have is 300. At least it's not 0. But remember filling in your name on the SAT, like
you get the basic points just for showing up.
It's points for showing up.
In your column, you have people writing in about tons of topics, but does financial infidelity come up a lot?
Yeah, and I don't know that they would term it that way. I think that frustrations with how the other person spends. I think what's come up more than I ever expected is the frustration that a partner has other expenses. Like, I get a lot of letters from people who are on a second marriage, and the idea that they're married to someone who has to spend a certain amount a month on child support, alimony, you know that going in, and yet you're like, oh, if only we didn't have $600 a month that goes to, so that's the kind of thing where I'll hear, I wish we could spend our money differently, or I wish they could spend their money differently, or I worked so hard for 40 years of my life, and now I'm partnered with someone who may not have saved in the same way. I think it's much harder for people when they're older and in second and third relationships. It's like the decision somebody made years ago before you were even in the picture. So that's what I hear the most.
Almost non-negotiable items.
They're not. Right, they're not negotiable. And they were not a secret coming in. It's just, it feels different than they thought it would. And I think we judge romantic partners in a way we don't judge our friends for spending. I hear so often, like, I have a friend, right, whose partner, long-time partner, will spend a ton of money on Celtics, right? Like a significant amount. And she doesn't totally get it. Like, she's like, this is he's going to spend it on Celtics tickets. And I'm like, at the moment 10 years ago that I spent, I don't even want to tell you how much on Justin Timberlake tickets, because at the time it needed to happen. She was never like, what are you doing, right? The cost of bringing sexy back was so high, right? But so like, and as friends, we like celebrate this about each other. And I will always remind her, like, this brings him such happiness, right? Like, this is the thing, right? You would expect the same approval in that way. So I think for some reason we expect our romantic partners to be on the exact same page as we are about what the priorities are. And I also think there's understanding what the other person might spend on gifts. I once talked to a financial advisor who advised couples to talk about whether they're name brand ketchup people. Like, this is such a thing you don't think about, right? Like, or for instance, I buy toilet paper that could also be a blanket. It is so, like, 18 ply, right? So, like, but some people are like, why would you spend all of this money on toilet paper? You're getting like the aloe plus what, so to really look at your partner and say, I am never going to buy the generic, or I will always buy the generic. I will never, where does the cost savings come in? And that way there's not a shock when you're like, why did you buy Tylenol versus like the weird generic brand Target Tylenol, right? Yeah. Like, those are the things that can set people off in these tiny little ways, and you never think about them because you buy what you buy.
That is so important because it touches on values. What you think is quality for money or value for money, you really want to find someone kind of sort of sees the world in the same view, because otherwise it's just going to be a constant argument.
And I think gifts are a big part of that too. Last night I ordered a book for my sister because I thought she would like it. Well, what if I was partnered? I'm constantly buying books for people. I love that. It's an important expense to me that's not going to go away. So would somebody put up with the fact that my book bill is really, I don't know.
Right.
I don't know, but it's really figuring this stuff out and forgiving it and occasionally compromising. So yes, clearly when somebody has secret expenses, debt, lies, whatever, that's one thing. But I think often the fights are about these common expenses.
I feel like you pick up on a lot of those things when you're dating somebody. You pick up what kind of restaurants you're going to, what kind of gifts you're receiving versus giving. You kind of pick up on all these things, but then when you move in together, you kind of get to see even more. I feel like you get to see what does budgeting for you look like, what does budgeting for me look like, and see how you kind of...
Or in my case, I wasn't budgeting, and my husband was like, how do you live?
Yeah, I just don't like anything that expensive. I'm like, the stuff I like is probably going to work out. Yeah. It's like, that's my budgeting, and that to somebody else that might be frightening. And I'm not entirely sure also that I would love somebody to say, let me help you do this. I think I would probably resist. I think a lot about, not to get all self-helpy, but like that love languages book, like I'm super into that one. I'm generally not a big relationship decoder book person, but when I read that I was like, oh, one of my love languages is gifts. I like to buy people gifts. So that is a big thing, So yeah, I think that getting to know someone's financial profile and habits is just, it's a part of the package, and it's an important part. It can be super scary.
Absolutely.
And some people are really good about that. And I just think it's also, I love talking to couples about money. Like, I'm super nosy about it because I'm trying to, my parents had a really, I can't say what ended their marriage, but I think a huge part of it was money, that they weren't comfortable talking about it, that they didn't have a lot of it. And of course, when you don't have a lot of it, it's like the worst thing to talk about.
Right.
When I feel like I have some money, I love paying bills. It's like the most fun thing to do, right? But when you don't have it, it's stressful. And I like to know, well, how do people talk about it, and how do people share it or not share it? What gets combined, what doesn't, why? And I'm shocked that people have been so forthcoming. I think they can tell I'm not just being creepy about it. I just want to know for the column and for other things. And I think that along the way, I've sort of picked up what worked for some people and why, and it's fascinating. I give everybody a lot of credit for diplomatically dealing with such a complicated issue.
I think we actually had a statistic. Dave Ramsey claims that money is the number one problem that married couples fight about.
Yep.
Couples in healthy marriages talk more about money, and 54% of great marriages talk daily or weekly about money with their spouse.
You guys might laugh. My husband and I, 4 years ago, were in a very different position. I had student loans. We were renting in a very expensive apartment in New York City. We had lived in London. We had done lots of traveling, and we thankfully hadn't gotten ourselves into any credit card debt, but he's a super frugal European and was looking at me and my spending habits and was kind of like, you've got all this debt, like, then boom, I'm pregnant, and it's like, wow, now we really have to grow up and make some financial choices. And we did buy that Dave Ramsey book, and we were like, okay, let's look at some of these just very processual, simple steps, like have an emergency fund or do this or do that. But one thing he touches on, and we have integrated into our kind of lifestyle or structure, is a monthly meeting, sometimes more often, to actually sit down and talk through, okay, what's happening? What have we spent money on this month? What have we invested in? Have we, what are the big bills we have coming up? Have we planned for it? How much is in our emergency fund? And having that discussion, and it was very uncomfortable for the entire first year that we did it. And then as we started doing it more often, that discomfort kind of went away, and now it actually is a discussion we like having.
Well, so I have some questions. Was it uncomfortable because it was just the awkwardness of money, or did it feel like a slog of a task? Like, oh, now it's like, it's like how, a condo association meeting where you're like, okay, first point of business. But, right. Or did you feel like you might get in trouble? And did it get better because there was more money? Because I do think that when you have more money, you're like, oh, this is not so terrible to talk about. In fact, it's sort of fun. We can plan and feel good about ourselves.
As soon as my loans got paid off, it was like the world is our oyster.
Yeah.
Right? Then it became this planning discussion, and it was more forward thinking, future focused, creating a vision together, building a life together, that even though we had been married for 3.5 or 4 years at that point, we hadn't really sat down and had that conversation in a, really practical way. We knew that theoretically we kind of agreed on a lot of things, but we had never sat down and been like, oh, what's our family budget going to look like? It sounds corny, but I do think people need to at least have that discussion, maybe not in that tone, but they do need to have those discussions probably from the time that they move in together.
Or before. Because it could be shocking. And I think also knowing what things cost, like if, we talked about the Celtics game with my friend. If you ask me how much a Celtics ticket is right now, and I would believe that it's $100, and I would believe that it is $800. I do not know. Like, what are seasons tickets? And similarly, I'm sure there are some people where if I said how much are 5 hardcover books, that they would look at me and sort of be like 15, 25, 30. So to know what your partner's priorities are, but also what does that cost so that it's not shocking. And that, again, more comfortable when there's money in the picture. But so many couples are having these conversations at the start of relationships when they're younger, and there's just less money. And that is, and also just the disparity. I think that there was a recent letter where people talked about percentages. Are you going to pay the percent that you earn compared to your partner? I mean, these are awkward, weird conversations.
Most people are writing to you, and they're not saying, I'm having trouble talking about money with my partner. They're saying, I'm having trouble talking to them about this thing or this cost that's really frustrating. So they're not actually coming out and saying, we need to have a monthly money meeting. It's like, well, how do I talk about money without talking about money?
Mm-hmm. And it's often even one step away from that. I'm unhappy with my birthday gift. The house is a mess. These seem like questions that are sort of detached from money, because you can have all the money in the world and be a terrible gift giver, right? But they're not, right? Where so many questions are about the state of the house, right? And that, to me, there are very few issues about a house that cannot quickly be fixed with money. If you have all the money in the world and the house is a mess, guess what? You quickly rectify that, right? And so then the question is, well, the house is a mess. You don't want to be the person doing all the labor to deal with that. There's a cost associated with it. Who wants to spend that? Who doesn't? Why? So I find that so many of these questions that never use the word money, never use the word expense, are actually tied to how are we spending our money together and what are the big things? Like, if getting a person to clean your house is going to take away the fights for an entire year, guess what? It's an incredibly worthy expense. And it doesn't mean everyone can afford it, but it means that for some people, it seems like a gluttonous priority to have. But in fact, it might not be. It has saved, I'm sure, a better cable package and a second TV has saved a lot of marriages, I'm sure. And there's so many things that where, it's like, what do you really need? And I think also, like, when I ask couples about money and they get a little quiet when I know I've asked the wrong question, it's often because one person is doing all of the accounting and the other person might resent that they're not part of it, might just fear it as a part of their life that they don't even know. And I think that even if you are not someone who wants to be involved in that, to know the basics is important. I think sometimes, like, I'll have a friend who has a spouse who says, like, you can't be spending money on that anymore. The other person will say, well, like, I don't even know. For all I know, we have to have at least some people are going to be better at this than others, but to be able to have basic conversations, very basic, like, how are we doing? What is the plan? A wall isn't up.
Do you find that usually happens when there might be a disparity in salaries coming in?
That the person with the money manages the money?
Yes.
Sometimes, but you'd be surprised. Sometimes it's the person who is managing the home. So I know in sort of like straight people, very sort of traditional, like, marriages, when I go back, and I'm talking about like much older couples I'll talk to, I always assumed, well, it's, this old-fashioned notion that, well, the man is running it. Well, it turns out a lot of grandmas had been the home manager for a long time. In the case of
the traditional style in a home is the woman is paying the monthly bills or the household bills, yep, spending on groceries, etc., whatever.
Yeah, so they know what these cost.
But the men tend to be investing or saving the money, and then that becomes the wall on either side.
I'm getting milk, you're getting, when my grandparents were alive and I talked to them and they had a really happy marriage, she would say, oh, like, your grandfather's terrible with money. He was the one earning it, but he was terrible with it. So she was doing all of it.
It must help having someone to say, I got this, but also, can you double check, or can I talk to you about this to make sure this sounds normal? Because I don't think that many people, the reason we want to start this podcast is because we want to have these discussions and have them become more normal for people. And I think right now it's either you don't talk about it at all, or you kind of bounce around the subject so much that you don't really know what you're doing.
We obviously know that some couples move in together before they maybe get engaged, or, as that kind of premarital test.
Yes.
Looking at this through the financial lens, and based on your experience of your column and the research you've done, is there ever a time where you wouldn't recommend it?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that for every couple, it's a different thing, and it makes sense to me that for some people, they want to get married first. I mean, it's interesting. I think their geography has a lot to do with that too, right? So we live in a city. Many people live in cities when they're younger, and so many people use real estate prices to dictate commitment things, right? Because they have to. The reason why so many couples I know in Boston did move in with each other is because their rents were too high. Maybe they were sick of having a roommate and they have a partner and they're like, well, why wouldn't we live together? We can live in a 1-bedroom and we're sleeping in the same room, and now our rent is $500 each instead of, $1,000 each, right? So, and these days probably a ton more, right? So I think that already you're making these choices together. Listen, I think that it can work just fine getting married first, but I don't think I can think of a situation where I would say don't have that experience, like if you want it, because it's a great way to test what's happening. It's a good start, I think. And I think also, my sister always says this, that one of the most interesting things about her marriage is that, like, not that much changed. I mean, they don't have kids, so she was like, oh, like we got married and then we were still the same two humans in the same two places, and she was saying that, like, I got married because I liked what I had before I got married.
And that you can kind of iron out some of those kinks that could potentially be deal breakers if we are seeing that, half of marriages don't make it.
Yeah.
And how many of those are down to financial reasons.
I mean, I also talk to couples who have to make choices about investing in property together or making investments together before they get married. So is that a bigger commitment than getting married? In some cases it can be, right? So
I think it is.
I mean, it depends on your housing market, right? And all sorts of things. But, like, I have close friends who are, been together for many, many years and own something together, but it never really occurred to them to get married. They're connected in all these ways, many of which are financial, right? Where that is just as much of a commitment. They don't, and for so many people, the idea of getting married is also a wedding, right? So are you wedding people? What's the expense of that? I mean, to me, the idea of starting cohabitation with what could be outlandish expenses or outlandish gifts, like it can go in so many different directions, but I think living together first can answer a lot of questions.
Like you said, a lot of young people live in cities. Do you think that living in these high rent cities like Boston, New York, San Francisco, LA, do you think couples are moving in together sooner? And by contrast, do you think they might be staying together longer because of the high cost of breaking a lease or then moving?
I think what we see, and I can think of like 10 letters right off the top of my head, are these weird scenarios of I'm dating someone who's living with their ex. Because it's so expensive to move out or like break a lease or whatever that, like, I see, it's not so much that the people are like, well, I'll stay together. It's like, no, we're going to break up and I will literally use the same toilet as you because we are going to ride this lease out.
It is.
Or we are, that no one has this disposable income to get a second apartment, or, where people are cohabitating. They continue that living situation past the expiration date of their relationship, and that is awkward, and it's awkward to restart your life in that way. But I have had many letters over the years about, either somebody's dating someone who lives with a partner, or we've broken up and I've got 4 months left of this. What am I allowed to do here? And also the pressure on couples that move in together. Part of the step to move in is about money, right? Like, we don't have to have roommates and we can afford a place. That means you're getting a 1-bedroom. You're not on a TV show, right? Where, like, suddenly there are like 3 bedrooms and no one can explain why, right? It's like, it doesn't look like a sitcom where everyone has space to breathe. And it's funny when people ask me about moving in and timing of moving in, at least in New England, one of my first pieces of advice is not about the timing of when in a relationship, but I will say, please do it in May. I have so many friends who moved into a 650 square foot apartment with a significant other in February, and they can't take a walk. You can say, wow, I'm sick of looking at this person, and now I'm going to find Boston Common, take a walk through it, and that is a gift to be able to do.
All I know is I need to be able to shut a door if I need to. it's shocking because you end up seeing studios, you end up seeing one bedrooms that are really not really one bedrooms. And I was like, I just kept saying to our realtor, I was like, we need to be able to be separate if we need to be separate.
Yeah.
And together if we want. That was super hard to find.
Ideally, a couple would have a 2-bedroom place, you know, for guests, for whatever. They'd have like a magic second bathroom that I often see on television shows where I'm like, these beautiful 2-bed, 2 baths, and no one, like, I mean, try to Google that in Boston. It's not an easy thing.
Especially those first couple months when you're like living in boxes. And
talking about stuff, Katie and I were talking about the IKEA test. Now, I have a personal belief that if you can survive going to IKEA with your partner, picking out furniture, bringing it home, putting it together, and not breaking up, you're doing okay.
Oh, at that point, like, get married forever. I can't think of my happily married friends who could, I mean, as far as assembling it, are you kidding me? Oh my gosh, no.
I mean, I've had a lot of fights in IKEA with both my husband, when I was dating him at the time, and with even my roommate, best friend. There's always just a disagreement about, you know, what kind of pot you want to get, or what shape you want the sofa.
Pot?
Or do you need the pot, right?
Yeah.
And when you live in 800 or 600 square feet, whether you get that pot actually does make a difference.
It does.
And every little thing that comes in here, it needs to be necessary.
You know, listen, buying stuff is super fun. I love buying stuff, and I think that it's something fun to do with a partner. And I think also, and this goes back to gift giving, just the idea of experiences versus stuff. And what's your philosophy about that? You know, for a lot of couples, it's also moving in. It's like, you both have stuff. And what is the better stuff?
I feel like a lot of couples, they'll either be coming from roommate situations, or someone might live on their own and then you might be moving in, or they might be moving in. So is it your bed or my bed? Is it your kitchen table or my kitchen table? Your couch or my couch?
And that's really hard because we all love our own stuff. But, you know, it's also, what are your priorities? My best friend, when she moved in with her now husband, he had like this bachelor couch that had cup holders in the couch, like plastic cup holders in the couch. So here's the thing. So she, and by the way, she was like an interior designer. So she was like, I cannot live in a place that has this massive couch. Then she really thought about it. And it was this temporary thing where he was like sad to let it go. It's super comfortable. And I would come over and I'd sit on it and I'd be like, you know, I am enjoying myself. Fast forward a few years, at this point, they have 2 kids right in a row. The children, they march back and forth. The juice cups are in the cup holders. And she was like, this is a 5-year period of my life that I can't have a nice couch.
Right.
And guess what? This is the best couch ever. Thank goodness I did not force the removal of this couch. So it sort of also took that deep breath on her part to say, like, I don't need like this like West Elm like fluffy pillow situation because my children will rip it to shreds, and I need the cup holders. And I just thought that was like a really great mature decision, because he was like, what is the thing you want? We're not living that way for a while. It's allowing the character of 2 people into a place. Like the idea that you should be hiding is probably not.
But I think it comes up especially when one person is moving into another person's space.
Yes.
I think there's a balance of being like, well, I'm coming into your space, but I'm not taking over. But I also want it to feel like home.
I mean, I think there's nothing wrong with looking at somebody and saying, let's take everything down off the walls. Let's put everything, lay it out. Let's take all the things, put it on the carpet, and then make some choices together. And I think that can work.
Right. Yeah, and it doesn't all have to be new, fancy, name brand designer furniture. And, you know, I do have 2 small kids, and my husband and I were really frugal about how we furnished our home. We took hand-me-downs from family friends. We made sure that we weren't overextending ourselves for the sake of kind of looking nice and maybe feeling financially strapped. And I'm very grateful we approached it that way.
I mean, I think so much of this is not walking into these conversations assuming that it's an argument, assuming that your partner doesn't know what they're doing, or that they're going to think you don't know what you're doing. To take a tip without feeling like, but to be able to take a deep breath and say this person is with me, not against me, is so important.
According to research by the Federal Reserve Board, those with the highest credit scores were most likely to form long-lasting, committed relationships. And the greater the mismatch between a couple's credit scores, the more likely they are to separate within the first 5 years of dating. Wow. So what do you think? What's your credit score a good first date question?
I mean, but credit scores are so weird, right? Like, credit scores like don't tell you a whole lot, right? And credit and having no credit is a possibility, right? But it doesn't surprise me that people who are committed to caring for their financial profile would also be good at committing to their romantic profile in that way, right? People who are consistent in one area of their lives are consistent in another. All the talks in the world, you can't anticipate everything. You can't look as a 25-year-old at your 25-year-old partner and say, when your mom later on in life wants to live with us, are we going to spend money to,
It's not a third date question.
It's not even like a 100th date question,
right.
Because you're going to feel differently about it over the years. Like your own opinions about this will change, but a lot of this you just can't anticipate. Are you married to living where you're living? Are you open to, do the kids necessarily have to go to private school or not? Like, these are all they're such big philosophical questions, but they're all tied to money at the end of the day.
What I'm hearing is communication is key. Really just talking about what you want your shared life to look like, and not being maybe aggressive or critical of the other person's spending or saving habits, but more painting that forward-looking vision together and saying this is what we're working towards and what changes might we need to make in a few places to get there, and work through it one issue at a time.
One worthy expense when you move in together is to, if you're feeling at all weird about this, or if you don't feel like you know all the things to think about, to meet with a financial advisor, even if it's just one time, not because you're in trouble, but to go in and say, what are the things that trip people up? What are the things we should be asking? Because to have a third party there who's going to keep a, straight face and just say, here's what you need to know, here's what I see other couples doing, it can just be so much easier. And it doesn't have to feel like some horrible lecture. I think there are so many financial advisors now who know what this is, and they know how to just pop in and say, here's what you should be paying attention.
And there's nothing wrong with asking for help.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to the 411K. Tune in for more podcasts and follow us on Instagram at @the_411K. Cheers.